Bureau this afternoon. Andrea, thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie.
And Katie, we have word now, according to the AP, that approximately 100 people are confirmed dead in the attack on the Pentagon early this morning. We're not clear as to whether that number includes the number of people who are on the jetliner that was crashed into that building. But again, the AP is now reporting that approximately 100 people were killed in the Pentagon prong of this four-prong attack.
We should mention 64 people were aboard that plane that crashed into the Pentagon. 27 people have been taken to a hospital in Arlington, Virginia. 8 others who had been injured to a Washington hospital as well.
Do we have Ken Allard on the phone now?
In the studio.
Oh, there we go. Ken is an international terrorism expert. Ken, good morning to you. Good afternoon to you, excuse me.
How are you, Matt?
I'm fine, thank you. When you hear the U.S. officials saying they are already looking in the direction of Osama bin Laden, do you think they're looking in the right place?
I think so. Matt, I mean, the sophistication of this attack, the fact that it was elaborately planned, flawlessly executed, and as audaciously conceived as it was, all that evidence points in one direction. So until something else happens, you clearly look for your leading suspect. That's Osama bin Laden.
And for Americans who had, I guess, enjoyed some sense of security, thinking that perhaps Osama bin Laden and his organizers and compatriots were operating in other places, it appears that this had to have been organized, at least with great help, inside our own borders.
Matt, that's probably one of the most worrying aspects of this, because it has been an article of faith among U.S. counterintelligence people that operating inside the United States was something that was difficult, maybe even impossible. Among the other things that came down today, along with those buildings, were those preconceptions. We now know that he has been able to operate successfully inside this country, and that indeed he has a support network here. That's going to be a very tough thing to go in and root out. And
staying on that subject, when we talk about a massive intelligence breach here, the fact that no intelligence picked up a warning that this attack may have been coming, it's one thing if our intelligence overseas missed this, it's another thing if our intelligence right here in the United States missed it.
Well, the thing that is, I think, going to really tell the tale here is precisely the effort to find out what did our intelligence agencies know and when did they know it? What did they pass along? We've been saying all day that it is very, very reminiscent, of the attack on Pearl Harbor. And after the attack on Pearl Harbor, guess what we did? We went back and found out that, yes, the evidence was there. We should have known. And again, I think what we're going to see, even in this instance, this Pearl Harbor of the 21st century, is very much the same kind of thing.
And Ken, let's explain the difference here. People are already saying that we have perhaps too much technical intelligence and not enough human intelligence. Describe the difference and how each would be used.
Well, basically, it's the difference between getting intelligence by machines, mostly satellites, eavesdropping, and that kind of thing, from the very nitty-gritty business that obtains when you're doing human intelligence, i.e. spies, and counterintelligence. And all that basically means is that you are going out, you're penetrating those organizations so that when they are planning an attack, you've got somebody on the inside. It is a very tough, very dirty business, but it's the kind of thing that you have to do. And for the last 20 years in our intelligence establishment, we've not done nearly enough to train and acquire the kinds of people that can give us that kind of intelligence. And again, now we find out just how desperately that kind of information is needed.
When the president talks about hunting down those responsible and punishing those people or anyone who harbored those people, short of an admission of guilt or a claim of responsibility from Osama bin Laden or some other group, how are they going to put the pieces together to be sure that they're striking back in the right direction?
Well, Matt, it's said that revenge is a dish best eaten cold. And I think that while we are all tempted to want to lash out immediately, this is going to be the kind of thing that we have to get right. And part of the reason for that is the fact that this is going to be, again, an effort that's going to entail the intelligence agencies, our diplomatic efforts, as well as our military. And it's terribly important that we get these targets right. It's terribly important that we not just do the kind of pinprick attacks that we've had in the past. This is all or nothing.
Ken, talk about the coordination that was required to pull this off, with 2 planes striking the World Trade Center within 20 minutes of one another, and then 20 minutes later, another at the Pentagon, and a short time after that, the 4th plane crashing in Pittsburgh.
Matt, the coordination here I cannot say enough about, simply because of the fact that in the military we talk about time over target, time on target. And what you had here, it was necessary for the terrorists to do that, because once we copped to the idea that there were systematic attacks underway, we could take countermeasures. They did all this within the space of about half an hour, 45 minutes. And what they had to do was to be in communication. They had to have a good plan. They had to be well positioned, and they had to have excellent communications with each other to know that the operation was all underway. The thing that's amazing, too, is the fact that they had to have some understanding of the weather. The weather both here in Washington as well as in New York was absolutely perfect. It was the crystal clear kind of weather that you would want to have if you were planning an operation like this.
I'm sorry, Ken, the physical target, obviously, they brought down 2 towers of the World Trade Center, a section of the Pentagon, and it seems luckily no building was hit outside Pittsburgh. But talk for a second, if you will, about the emotional target that they managed to strike this day.
Matt, everything that they did brought the war home to the United States. They struck deliberately at our financial center. They struck deliberately at our transportation network. They struck deliberately at the military apparatus of the United States. And much more critically, what they took on was the power, the prestige, and the might of the United States. So, among other things, this is going to require a response that is totally out of proportion to anything that we've seen in the counterterrorist war to this point.
Ken Allard. Ken, thanks very much.
Pleasure, Matt.
Katie?
Matt, as you well know, scores of New York hospitals and hospitals in the New York area have been mobilized to deal with the thousands of people who were injured and critically injured, some even killed in the blast. Bob Bazell spent most of the day at St. Vincent's Hospital here in Manhattan. Bob, what can you tell us? Do you have any clear numbers at this point in time, or is that still impossible to say?
It's very difficult to say, Katie, but what's kind of frightening right now is that the numbers are fairly low, and low is a relative term in this context. But right now we know of about 1,000 casualties in all the New York area hospitals that have been taking them in. The one where I was, St. Vincent's Hospital, had us about 250. As you can see from that picture, some of them are horribly burned and mangled in other ways. In addition to the burn injuries, the hospitals have been receiving concussion injuries from people who were hit by falling stone and broken glass. But the numbers are low because probably most of the victims are still buried in the rubble, and the rescuers can't get to it because of the intense flames that we've been seeing all day. In addition to that, about 1 in 5 of the people who were brought in seriously injured or dead were either firefighters, policemen, or EMS workers. So an enormous number of the people who were injured today were rescue workers because of this timing between the crash into an explosion in the first World Trade Center tower and the second one. A lot of people were going in to put out that emergency, and then the second building exploded, and then there were the collapse. So we were seeing a lot of heroic firefighters and police and emergency service workers who were injured as well. In addition to this injury story, Katie, today has been a day, of course, like none other in New York. All day long, people were embracing each other on the street, strangers crying, people hysterically looking for their children. New York City schools kept the children all day long, but everybody wanted to know where their children were. The subways stopped running. People had relatives inside those buildings. Of course, enormous numbers of people worked in the World Trade Center. There was one nurse at St. Vincent's Hospital where I was who was on an email with her husband who was in the standing tower. He was assuring her he was okay. The email went blank. She looked out the window and the building collapsed. We're going to hear hundreds, probably thousands of stories like that in the next few days as we get more and more information out of this. But for a while today, Katie, as you also know, the New York City subway system was closed down. There was no way to get anywhere. People were just wandering around aimlessly and looking at the smoking hulks of what used to be one of the major landmarks of the city, Katie.
In fact, Bob, some of that video of people sort of wandering around in a daze, sort of aimlessly, completely covered with soot and ash, almost looking ghost-like. Did you see many of those people kind of wandering or being helped to St. Vincent's?
I did indeed, Katie, because St. Vincent's is the closest trauma center to the World Trade Center, and it's where the biggest number of trauma victims went, and a lot of family members came there looking for their loved ones. Also, downtown Manhattan, for people or southern Manhattan, for people who are familiar with the geography, was just closed off. Nobody could go in there, but people could walk out, and it was like an enormous army of dazed people covered with ash who kept walking up the major thoroughfares, going north, trying to find their way home or somewhere away from the smoke, the dust, and the death that they had seen everywhere. I saw ambulance workers today, Katie, crying. These are people who have seen the most horrible things on earth that you could imagine, and yet they hadn't imagined that they would ever see anything like this today. Policemen were crying, firemen were crying. I don't think anybody had ever imagined that New York City or any city in the United States would ever face a trauma, a crisis like the one we're seeing today.
I know that Cardinal Egan was on hand from the New York Archdiocese offering his prayers, even delivering last rites to some of the victims who were brought to St. Vincent's.
Yes, he was there, and he was saying religious He had religious sentiments for people of all faiths who were brought in there. St. Vincent's happens to be a Catholic hospital, but it's not just for Catholics, of course. And the sense of death, destruction is enormous, but the most eerie thing about standing in the emergency room is that things went much slower than anticipated. There still are enormous numbers of people under that rubble, and it's going to be a long time. The people at the hospitals expect to be taking care of survivors for many days to come.
How about staffing, Bob? Are they concerned about that, or are they pretty hopeful that they'll have enough medical professionals on hand to deal with the people who continue to stream in there?
Well, the New York City Emergency Services systems had a plan for this that worked as far as we can tell, very well. They set up triage centers in 2 locations at least, maybe more, in the downtown region, and they sent people off to various hospitals so that no one hospital was swamped. And in fact, a large number of people were taken on the Staten Island ferry across the Hudson River to hospitals both on Staten Island, and even a much larger number to hospitals in New Jersey. And so as a result, the hospitals have managed to be able to deal with the load that they've had, and they're starting to get ready for the long haul. Everybody who was on the staff of every hospital showed up volunteering. At one point, in St. Vincent's Hospital, which is in Greenwich Village, they put out a call for blood donors, and so many showed up, hundreds and hundreds of people within minutes showed up, that they had to take them in buses to other hospitals where there was still a great need for blood. But nobody thinks this story, in terms of caring for the survivors, is anywhere near its end.
All right, Bob Bazell. Bob, thank you so much for that report and for talking with us this afternoon. We appreciate it. Incidentally, 2 makeshift morgues have been set up here in Manhattan, one in the borough of Manhattan Community College, the second at Greenwich Street and the corner of Northmore, and a 3rd makeshift morgue may be set up a little bit later on. Matt?
And as Bob may have mentioned, New Yorkers have been lining up at some hospitals looking to donate blood for survivors who may be in need. Ashley Banfield has been down in the area near the World Trade Center reporting all day. She joins us now. Ashley?
Hi, Matt. I'm having a tough time hearing you, but there are a number of emergency vehicles that are now coming out of the vicinity of number 7 World Trade Center that has just gone down. And I just wanted to let you know very quickly, before that, number 6 World Trade Center went down, and housed in those 2 buildings, offices of OSHA, U.S. Customs, ATF, and a number of other retail spaces as well. Not only that, but financial offices too. Those buildings had all been cleared out after the first plane hit the World Trade Center this morning. So there was some speculation that there's not a soul in those buildings at the time. Certainly, number 7 that just went down as we were live on the air earlier on with MSNBC was cleared out. Most people, they said earlier that they were just waiting for that building to go down. So they were expecting this to happen. Not only that, it is still an awesome sight when this happens. I just wanted to introduce you very quickly to Mel and his son Max, who have basically evacuated their own house. You live just down this way, just past this red building, is that right?
Yeah, Duane Street, just by Chambers Street.
You just picked up your animals and 1 overnight bag and gotten out of there. Were you told by anybody that you needed to get out of there quickly?
No, actually, we had a hard time getting back there because the whole area's been cut off. But we'd already left, but we didn't have any of our stuff. So now we're trying to get back because the water, the electricity's all been cut off. And, you know, we basically have to move out of the area.
Where are you going to spend the night?
Friend's house. We have, you know, our children, our other children in Brooklyn. We can't even figure out how to get there. So.
Max, you were in school, you were in high school, not far away. You could see the actual plane crash and the fireball that ensued after that.
Well, I was in class and my friend said, "Oh my God, someone bombed the World Trade Center," and we all said, "That's not funny." And we looked out the window and there was an explosion. Then we turned on the news and we saw on the TV the smoke and the coverage. We saw another plane going. I said, "Well, is this a replay of some sort?" And we looked out the window and we saw the explosion carry through the other side of the building.
And they just kept you in the school at that point?
They kept us in the school, and I think it was a smart idea because if they kept us in the school, like that way kids wouldn't run down there and see what was happening. And then later they evacuated the school.
All right, thanks very much and good luck to you. I hope you are all safe. Matt, I just wanted to tell you really quickly what happened earlier. We have been moved about 5 different times. My producer and I, early this morning, right after the first World Trade Center came down, were caught in the debris of the collapsing second World Trade Center. In fact, our clothes are still covered with all of this gray ash, and that's what you see when you see a lot of the people who are coming out of that epicenter They're covered from head to toe in gray. Some of the emergency vehicles that have been coming through here as well, windows blown out. We saw an ambulance that was completely burned out on one side. The windows were blown out. The ambulance driver just told us as he was rolling by, this was a brand new ambulance this morning. Not only that, but we can tell you that we've been moved 5 times because there is the concern that more buildings will collapse. We are not being told now that any more buildings are in peril of collapsing, but we have heard other buildings potentially nearby are unstable. They are keeping us at this particular perimeter because there's not too much concern that the wind is going to blow northward. The wind has been blowing eastward off of the island of Manhattan and into the other boroughs east in Brooklyn. But at this point, we seem to be okay at this vantage point, and we are about, I'd say about 7 blocks from where 7 World Trade Center stood just within the half hour.
All right, Ashley Banfield reporting from downtown. Ashley, thanks very much. Just a reminder that airports across the country are closed. There's a ground hold in effect until about noon, at least noon tomorrow. For a while, the borders between the U.S. and Canada and the U.S. and Mexico were closed. We're not sure whether those have been reopened. There was a high state of alert issued for nuclear power plants across the country. Obviously, some fear that if planes had been hijacked, that one might target a nuclear facility. Again, so much of life in America as we know it has been disrupted, and that, of course, is one of the targets of terrorism.
That's right. We want to remind people also, once again, Matt, that President Bush will address the nation at some point tonight. When we find out specifically when, we will let you know. Meanwhile, there is a sports facility, a massive sports facility called Chelsea Piers here in Manhattan, which is about 20 blocks away from the World Trade Center, from the Twin Towers, which we've been watching first burn and then totally collapse all day today. Apparently a triage unit has been set up at that facility. Soledad O'Brien is on the phone now. Soledad, what can you tell us is happening there?
Well, Katie, you're absolutely right. The Chelsea Piers, which is, as you described it, a massive, sprawling athletic complex, has been set up as a triage facility, and it runs along, of course, the West Side Highway. Looking up the West Side Highway, looking down the West Side Highway, ambulances lined up one after the other. They are all on active standby because the doctors inside this triage unit, who as of yet are not treating any patients, have been told the fire is just burning too hot. They can't actually get in to rescue people and then bring them here. They are, however, on active standby. We have seen easily 100 doctors in and out. They've come from area hospitals, and by area hospitals, I mean not only here in New York City, but also Connecticut, New Jersey. Doctors have volunteered their time, nurses as well, EMTs. In addition, there's also a line for other volunteers who've come by, and a line where they are taking blood donations because, of course, as many have mentioned before me, they're looking and they need desperately blood to be donated. So they are on active standby inside the Chelsea Piers on a basketball court, in addition to some of the studios that are working studios here at Chelsea Piers. They've set up hundreds of tables. These are going to be makeshift operating tables, and as soon as those ambulances come by, they're going to bring folks in who are survivors, hopefully, and be able to work on them. Although there are many doctors that we have talked to today who said that they also could expect, because of the size and the sprawl of this facility, it could as well be turned into a morgue. They are saying at this time no one can get in there, it's too hot, and they are just on standby for whatever horrific, and they tell me they are expecting a horrific scene as soon as they can get in there to rescue some of the folks inside.
All right, Soledad O'Brien. Soledad, thank you very much.
CNBC's Ron Insana has been very close to this story throughout the day. He was actually close to the World Trade Center when one of the towers collapsed. And Ron, I know that was a close call for you personally, but I'm curious if you could just inform us a little more about the types of offices that are located at the World Trade Center and their importance to the financial markets in this country and around the world.
Well, Matt, the World Trade Center is one of the nerve centers in lower Manhattan where there are not just financial firms, Morgan Stanley being the biggest financial client or tenant in that building, but there are exchanges that trade gold and silver. We have seen other firms like Cantor Fitzgerald, which is not well known among the general public, but is a very large NASDAQ-style trading firm. So this is one of the financial nerve centers in lower Manhattan where there is a great deal of activity every day. There are trading rooms. There is, as we said, an exchange. Commodities are traded there. It's an environment where now a couple things are going to be called into question. One, the viability of some of the client firms to make good on whatever outstanding transactions they had prior to today. To the extent that financial activity is impaired, permanently impaired at the World Trade Center, that may have a feedback effect elsewhere. We should point out that the financial market response around the world today was dramatic. We saw stocks drop somewhere between 6 and 8% in Europe today. Gold prices spiked up rather dramatically in overseas markets, and then we also had oil go up more than $3 a barrel on the world oil markets as well. So the effects, not just to the financial markets themselves, but to the economy, are being questioned and analyzed all around the world this evening, Matt.
And of course, we've heard that the markets here in this country were closed today. We've been told they'll be closed again tomorrow. I mean, how long can we expect them to be shut down until they can get up and running again?
Well, there are so many sensitive issues to be dealt with, not the least of which will be security for the participants in those marketplaces downtown, the New York Stock Exchange being the principal exchange in Lower Manhattan. It is likely, one would assume, that because of the worry that disrupting the financial markets could be worse than letting them open up and respond to the situation, that tomorrow may be the only day on which the various exchanges are closed. That remains to be seen, and there will be a decision tomorrow as to whether or not the New York Stock Exchange will remain closed beyond Wednesday. Latin American markets, for instance, will decide tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time whether or not to open as scheduled. There will be regular trading in Tokyo tonight. So financial regulators, policymakers will be deciding over the next several hours whether to allow the markets to respond to this catastrophe and let them take their course. The biggest question right now is how this event is going to affect consumer psychology in this country, and will this terrorist attack create a level of uncertainty and possibly even panic among consumers that they really curtail their spending, which could throw the U.S. economy into an official recession. That's the worry among economists this evening.
All right, CNBC's Ron Insana. Ron, thank you very much.
You,
Katie?
Skip Brandon is the former FBI counterterrorism chief. He joins us from Washington. Mr. Brandon, thank you for joining us. What will the FBI's role be in determining who was responsible for these attacks and also in protecting the United States from future attacks as well?
They'll be the lead law enforcement agency in the effort, and they'll coordinate all of the efforts of not only law enforcement but of the intelligence community in this. This will be probably the largest effort the FBI has ever undertaken.
You know, senior U.S. intelligence officials, or one senior U.S. intelligence official, says now that the U.S. is 90% certain that bin Laden was responsible for today's attack. Would you concur with that conclusion?
I think that's a very good possibility. You have to look at who has the organization and who has the capability to do something like this. And of course, bin Laden's al-Qaeda organization has to be right at the top of the list. I agree.
Well, tell us, I mean, it seems that people are drawing that conclusion because this seems to be his organization's M.O. in the past. Can you describe other attacks that he is believed to be responsible for and why this seems to follow suit?
One of his people actually did the World Trade Center the first time it was bombed, a group that was affiliated with him. And the embassy bombings that have happened most recently are the ones that come to mind immediately. One thing that's interesting is that one of the people that did train with him, who was involved in the World Trade Center, had been almost caught in the Philippines during an explosion. The investigators after this explosion found evidence in his apartment which indicated large-scale attacks and the use of American airplanes blowing them out of the air, a variation on what happened today.
All right, Skip Brandon, former FBI counterterrorism chief. Again, Mr. Brandon, thanks so much.
Katie, all day long we've been hearing horrifying stories from people who were eyewitnesses to at least one portion of this attack. Harry Crosby is a managing director at Merrill Lynch, a company that has its offices in Lower Manhattan. Harry, good morning. Good afternoon, excuse me. It's been a long day.
Hi, Matt. How are you?
Tell me, I'm fine, thank you. Tell me, I know you got fairly close to the World Trade Center towers at the point before they were collapsing, and you explained something and described something to me on the phone before that stopped my heart, and that was the images you saw of people scrambling to escape the flames on one of those towers, and then some of those people actually jumping off those towers.
Yes, I think the thing that was most harrowing, we tend to ignore common sense. I was about 3 blocks away. The first building had already been hit. The second building had just been hit. And the impact of the second building, of the plane coming from the second building, came from the south. So to me, from where I stood, it looked like a massive explosion. I continued to see people actually go in both directions, oddly enough. I think people were evacuating all buildings. I was actually at that time trying to get to work. and basically stood and watched, a bit like a deer in the headlights, the people evacuating. The fire was tremendous in the first building, the northmost tower, and people could not escape, I think, the heat. They continued to go up, it appears, and there were an enormous number of people that jumped from the building.
So you're talking about people jumping from above probably the 80th or 90th floor, and we've had reports that some people were actually leaving windows in the building holding hands.
They were jumping in pairs. They were jumping. It was raining people. It was amazing to see, and while you think you should turn away and escape, I think everybody was just frozen and watching. There was a lot of crying. I think a lot of people were extremely disturbed, but very few people left the scene. The other thing that was quite disturbing, I think no one, including myself, questioned the integrity and the strength of both the buildings that collapsed. Most of the police were there. They responded quickly and tried to make way for EMS and paramedics and others to get close to the building. And I think a lot of people were in fact trapped when the first building collapsed. I had then moved north towards the Travelers Building, 388 Greenwich, and at that point it was spooky, and just escaped the first collapse.
All right, Harry Crosby. Harry, thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt.
I know that we're going to be hearing many harrowing stories along those lines. I know Harry said to us there were about 100 or 150 people who jumped to their deaths from the high floors of the World Trade Center. Again, it's been quite a day. We started by watching just before 9 o'clock a gaping hole that we thought was some kind of plane accident that had crashed into the World Trade Center, and we watched and saw live a second plane crash into the second Twin Tower. Later we heard about the Pentagon, and then of course that fourth terrible crash outside Pittsburgh. Some stations will be staying with us, some will be returning to local news. We will have blanket coverage on this NBC station either way. For those of you who are staying with us,
you're watching NBC4, working for you. Live from the area's leading news station, this is News 4 at 6.
Words are woefully inadequate to describe what happened today. A nation that once felt safe has been violated by a series of deadly terrorist attacks. Good evening, I'm Jim Batts.
And I'm Doreen Gensler. It began this morning when terrorists crashed two hijacked airliners into the World Trade Center towers in New York. Both of the Twin Towers would later collapse. Thousands have been injured, but at this hour there's still no way to determine how many have been killed.
And then another jet, this one from Dulles Airport, crashed into the Pentagon. The Associated Press is now reporting that at least 100 people have been killed or injured in that attack.
And a fourth plane crashed in western Pennsylvania. Officials say there is reason to believe that this plane was headed for Camp David, the presidential retreat in western Maryland. President Bush promises to track down the terrorists behind this attack on America.
We have a great deal of information to share with you tonight.
But we begin with I.J. Hudson, who has a look at a timeline of how today's tragic events unfolded. I.J.?
Well, Doreen, it was a beautiful early fall morning here in Washington and in New York City. A lot of people were just arriving at work, and that's the time that the terrorists chose to strike with sudden, deadly impact. Here is a timeline of the day's events. The disaster begins at approximately 8:42 Eastern Time. A plane attacks the first of the World Trade Center Twin Towers.
The bottom elevator, the glass, just flames exploded out the front of the World Trade Center. Glass flew everywhere.
Roughly 21 minutes later, at 9:02 a.m., the second jetliner can be seen slamming into the other tower of the World Trade Center. About 30 minutes later, President Bush makes a brief statement from Florida.
Today we've had a national tragedy. Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
At approximately 9:40 this morning, a third hijacked plane crashes into the Pentagon. The Federal Aviation Administration shuts down all air traffic takeoffs nationwide. Government buildings in our area are immediately evacuated, including the White House and the Capitol. At 9:59 this morning, the South Tower of the Trade Center collapses, with an unknown number of people still trapped inside. Around the same time, another hijacked jetliner crashes in western Pennsylvania. At 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. Shortly after 1 o'clock this afternoon, President Bush vows to do whatever is necessary to keep Americans safe.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Altogether, there were 4 hijacked planes. There were 2 from American Airlines. Flight 77 originated at Dulles Airport and was bound for Los Angeles. That plane hit the Pentagon. There were 64 people aboard. American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles hit the South Tower of the World Trade Center. There were 92 people aboard. There were also 2 planes from United Airlines. Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco crashed in western Pennsylvania with 45 people on board. And United Airlines Flight 175 from Boston to Los Angeles crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. There were 65 people on board.
Jay Hudson, thank you.
There is still no way to assess the damage or to comprehend the casualties at the Pentagon. Just when the entire nation was focused on what was happening in New York, suddenly Washington became the target. Julie Carey is at the Pentagon now with more on this. Julie?
Well, as you can tell from the smoke, fire continues to spread through the Pentagon more than 8 hours after what one official here has called a full assault on the United States of America. It is unknown how many dozens of people have perished inside or whether there are any survivors still trapped in the massive building. But at this hour, with the fire still burning, no search and rescue can yet be attempted. The scene was both surreal and horrifying. The Pentagon had already activated a crisis team in response to the World Trade Center attack when a hijacked American Airlines 757 plowed into the side of the building. The Pentagon, the very image of national security, was burning a yawning hole in the middle of the building. The plane, carrying 58 passengers and 6 crew members, penetrated 3 of the 5 rings of hallways that formed the Pentagon's unique structure. Witnesses describe seeing an enormous fireball. Then heavy black smoke rose into the sky.
And I looked over to the side and I saw this jet coming in, and it was really low. And it was an American Airlines jet. You could read the AA on the side, silver fuselage, and it kind of disappeared over this embankment here for a moment, and then huge explosion. Flames flying into the air and just chaos on the road.
The plane struck a portion of the Pentagon that had recently been renovated. This construction worker was still inside doing work.
I'm up in the 6th corridor, and next thing you know, all of a sudden this whole explosion looked like you know, like one of them movies, like the airplane type, and all my cot started to rock, and I had to put my feet out to hold it. Then I see 2 trash cans coming out of the corridor, just flying past me, then smokes.
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was in his Pentagon office at the time of the attack. Officials say he helped some victims to stretchers before heading for the secure National Military Command Center in another part of the Pentagon. Department of Defense spokesman Craig Quigley says the massive evacuation of nearly 23,000 employees was remarkably calm.
The building was very quickly evacuated. People were sent as far away from the building as possible. Many people were sent home.
Once outside, however, shocked staffers began to cry, to shake. The injured were placed on stretchers and taken away by ambulance and helicopter. Many had suffered cuts and severe burns. Debris, including a chunk of the plane, was scattered across the Pentagon grounds. Assistant Secretary of Defense Tory Clark spoke late this afternoon.
This is a terrible day. It is a tragic day for America. Our thoughts and prayers are with the injured and their families and the casualties. We're taking every appropriate step and precaution to prevent further attacks. We're making every effort to take care of the injured still in the building, and we're taking every appropriate measure to determine who is responsible.
As the fires raged, a portion of the Pentagon collapsed. Flames continued to spread throughout the day, even as firefighters kept pouring water on the structure. Pentagon officials refused to estimate how many have died inside.
What we're trying to do now is get information about where people were in what office areas so we can assist the fire department.
But again, as long as the fires keep burning, Pentagon officials say they cannot send search and rescue teams inside. A positive sign a short while ago, about 30 minutes ago, members of the Montgomery and Fairfax County search and rescue teams who had been waiting on buses nearby here were loaded, taken off those buses, picked up their equipment, and headed toward the Pentagon. So we know they are now staging in an area near the Pentagon. It may suggest that some movement will happen soon. Reporting live from the Pentagon, I'm Julie Carey. Back to you.
Julie, thank you very much. We just received word that there have been explosions, reports of explosions in the city of Kabul in Afghanistan. We are told that those explosions are being caused by what are described as incoming missiles in Kabul, Afghanistan. We do not know exactly what the source of those missiles are. We can't tell you exactly what that is. We can tell you that Afghanistan has been the base of the activities of terrorist Osama bin Laden, who has been suspected of having something to do with these terrible attacks here in the U.S. today.
The people injured in the attack at the Pentagon have been taken to several area hospitals. The circumstances were made even more difficult because in some cases emergency crews could not get to those in desperate need of help. We begin with Sarah Lee, who is live at the Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington. Are they still bringing people in there, Sarah?
At last count, there were up to 36 patients here. This is the closest hospital to the Pentagon, and they are still in disaster mode as I speak now. I'm told that of the 36 patients that are being seen here, they are military and civilian personnel from the Pentagon. 5 among them are EMS workers who were injured. The doctors tell me there are 8 people in intensive care who are suffering from life-threatening conditions. One after another, patients are rushed here to Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington, the medical center closest to the Pentagon. Here arrive the walking wounded and others who are in much more dire situations.
We've seen a variety of injuries. I guess a lot of those we've seen are typically associated with a blast-type injuries. We've seen a lot of smoke inhalation injuries, and those people have been some of the sickest folks here. We've also seen some fractures of the extremities, also burns to the face and hands.
Dr. John Severa is the assistant chairman of the emergency department and heads up the hospital disaster team. He says of all the patients he's seen here, 8 are in intensive care, some on ventilators in life-threatening conditions.
Several folks were intubated, which means they're placed on respirators or breathing machines. And those patients, that was done because of significant smoke inhalation.
This volunteer EMS worker was at ground zero, helping to triage and transport.
The building was on fire. The fire would go out, then it would flame right back up. The fire would go out, it would flame right back up. Pieces of airplane everywhere on the lawn.
All around the area, people are opening their hearts and rolling up their sleeves. At Inova Fairfax Hospital, they're inundated with blood donors, blood that will be crucially needed as the Washington area heals from this horrific attack. Now back here live at Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington, I'm told that there are 2 patients still in surgery. One is having an operation to the femur, the other an operation on the hand. Earlier this afternoon, they were on a heightened alert for disaster mode. As many as 100 nurses here, 50 doctors, gurneys, stretchers, wheelchairs, all out on the sidewalk outside the emergency room. They are still on their heightened disaster mode. However, they have brought the stretchers and the gurneys just inside the doorway as the number of the injured coming in here has slowed down a bit, but they are still on standby, and as they say, there are some patients have actually been transferred here from some other outpatient facilities in the Pentagon vicinity. Sarah Lee live in Arlington. Doreen and Jim, back to you.
Sarah, thank you. Some of the most severely burned victims from the Pentagon attack were flown to the Washington Hospital Center. Some of them are in critical condition right now. Chris Gordon has that story.
Helicopters bring burn victims from the Pentagon to the MedStar unit of the Washington Hospital Center. Disaster and trauma services are on full alert to treat the serious injuries the victims suffered.
Many of them are badly injured in pain, and they have not said much in regard to pretty much in shock.
The Archbishop of Washington, Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, canceled meetings to celebrate the noon Mass at the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. Then he came here to the Washington Hospital Center to donate blood needed to treat the burn victims.
As soon as you hear it, you think, well, you're going to pray. You're going to ask the Lord to help these people who are injured, to receive those who have died, and in a very special way, you're going to ask the Lord to look out for their families. I'm a New Yorker, and At least I was a New Yorker when I was younger, and would go to work downtown so often, and saw the World Trade Center going up. And to imagine the World Trade Center gone and the skyline of Manhattan without it is a little traumatic, especially when you see how it happened. Because of this terrible act of some madmen, the day their whole world ended. Except that we know that life doesn't end here, that life goes on.
Many say America will be changed by these attacks on its symbols. The World Trade Center, symbol of capitalism, and the Pentagon, symbol of America's military might. Chris Gordon, News 4.
For the first time in the nation's history, air traffic in this country was shut down today and will remain so until at least sometime tomorrow. At our local airports, there is an eerie silence this evening and a sense of disbelief. Tony Dorsey is at National Airport. Mary Alice Salinas is at Dulles Airport, from whence the plane that crashed into the Pentagon took off. Mary Alice, we begin with you.
All right, Jim, we're looking at a picture right now. A U-Haul pulled up, and security police here just went running to it right now. You see the U-Haul there, and you can see airport authority going up to it right now. This happened obviously just seconds ago, so we pulled over, and we're giving you a shot of that. This is the most activity here we've seen in a few hours now. They are apparently speaking with the person who is driving that U-Haul. Most of the activity we've been seeing up until this point are these vehicles behind me, where they are laying more concrete barriers. Most of the passengers who were stranded here were gone by noon. Since then, up until now, it has been eerily quiet.
At Dulles International Airport, concrete barriers went up, planes were grounded, and the U.S. flag was drawn to half-staff. This after official word that an American Airlines flight that originated here crashed into the Pentagon. Robert Kaufman believes a fellow passenger watched American Airlines Flight 77 go down just ahead of their plane.
He said he saw a fireball, and we're not going to land here. Something's wrong.
Kaufman's plane was diverted to Dulles, where a pilot broke the news of the tragedies to passengers.
The pilot